There we go. We are going to record the session. Our small group sessions will not be recorded, but not everyone could be here to hear Joe today. So we will be able to get the video up of all the awesome stuff Joe has to share with us on the Belonging Brant website, belongingbrant.com. Easy to find, lots of great stuff there. So Joe Erpenbeck is a consultant, storyteller extraordinaire. I added that word. He didn't put that in his bio. And faculty member of the Assets-Based Community Development Institute, ABCD, at DePaul University. And over the last 20 years, he has provided training and worked with agencies. He's provided with neighborhood groups, faith communities, civic groups in the United States and Canada to build stronger, more inclusive neighborhoods. Most recently, he was the director of Assets-Based Community Development in ABCD in Vancouver, BC, and his team consisted of staff from 4 different agencies that build partnerships with local organizations, businesses, and citizens to build on the capacity of community and neighbors to care for each other and become places of hospitality. So Joe, if you want to read about some of Joe's work, it is highlighted in Peter Block's and John McKnight's Peter Block's book, Community, The Structure of Belonging, and in John McKnight and Peter Block's book, The Abundant Community. Both great books. I have read them both and they're fabulous. And we are always, Joe is a dear friend of ours, and we are always happy to have him with us. And so I'm going to turn it over to Joe. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Risa. So my kind of agenda today is, because I know a lot of people have been thinking about this and trying things that, whether you know it or not, have ABCD principles behind it. So I want to take a deep dive into some of the foundational principles of ABCD. We're going to do a number of small group discussions, but I want to start with a game. And for those online, you'll see this.
I'm going to do share screen, Joe.
It's a bingo. What's that?
We share screen for you.
Yep. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. We're playing bingo game. You're going to go around the room and you're going to talk to people, and you're going to find someone who fits some of these characteristics. Like you might find someone who enjoys hosting others, and they might tell you what kind of events. They might say, I love hosting. I do a Sunday football party, and all my friends from my rotisserie league come over. Or maybe whatever it is, I love gardening. And what you might ask them, you want them to put their name on the sheet and then an answer. So then you might ask them, you love gardening, what's your favorite thing to grow? I love to grow zinnias. So you might have me down there, write my name, and I would write zinnias. You can have no one on the sheet more than twice. It's not a get a 4 in a row or 4 corners or anything like that. It's we'll go for about 10 to 12 minutes. See if you can complete the whole sheet. But again, no one can be on your sheet more than twice. For those online, I think we're going to put you into breakout rooms, and you'll have a minute or so with whoever's in your breakout rooms to just have some discussion. You're trying to fill out as many of these boxes as you can in about 10 to 12 minutes. Does that make sense? Yeah. Get started. Okay, let me ask you a couple questions. It was interesting to watch you guys. I think you had only one to go, and a couple of you within 2 and 3. What struck you about what you just did?
Everyone has a gift, but I already knew that. So
I got to learn a story about something that I would have never thought could be something more than what it is at face value.
Okay.
So I thought that was really cool.
Just that nobody could teach others about languages or play musical instruments.
We were good at networking. If we didn't have the answer, someone else did. So we kind of broadened our scope of people that we know.
And I heard some of you were using knowledge you have, because I heard about Risha, you knew Risha collected something, so you were tapping into that right away. What else struck you?
Everybody contributed.
Yeah. How easy it was.
And mathematically, and I was telling Jake, and thanks Jake for being here and making this all happen, that he may get approached and invited to talk about his gift, and would he be willing to do that? He's well, usually I don't, but I'm happy to. And mathematically, with such, you need to engage everybody, or you couldn't have got the sheet done. And usually I try to make it that way because, and usually groups will start out kind of like you guys did. You'll start at the tables, having your discussion. Then you realize you've got to venture out, which is a big part of community development. You've got to get out.
Joe,
And
just-
you want to make sure everyone needs to be included. We'll talk about that a little bit later this morning. Who are the people we haven't included? Who haven't we talked to? Who don't we know what gift they have? And what's a way we can pull them in?
Joe, just a couple comments in the chat here, just that Krista said that we're not as different as we sometimes think we are. And that also Terry just saying connections just were happening like really quickly in just a few minutes, just from the folks online in the small groups. Yeah. Great.
Anyone else got anything you want to add? Well, I meant to go around as we do this, and if we could go around just quickly in the room and say who you are, where you're from, and why you came today. Except that you saw an invitation to be here and you came. So I thank you for being here, but maybe we'd start and work our way back.
Hi, I'm Sharon. I live in Brantford. And since I retired during the beginning of the pandemic, my idea was to get more involved in the community. And of course, that got sidetracked. And as soon as I could, I managed to connect with the ABCD symposium in the spring. And everything has just blossomed from there. That's awesome.
Thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
They're just saying online, if you could talk up a little bit more.
Okay.
I'm Carrie. I work at Community Living Brant and I live in Brantford. I work in the Life Share program and with community support. So any opportunity to learn more about ABCD training is good and helpful. And yeah, the more knowledge, the better.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
I'm Jamie. I also work for Community Living Brant as an employment consultant. I'm also the chair for the Downtown Central Neighborhood Association. So I think of both my personal volunteer life and in work, it's always great to continue my learning and development of ABCD.
Thanks for being here.
My name is John. I'm quite active in my neighborhood. I'm the vice president of the Eagle Place Community Association. I volunteer with a group called Arts After School Kids. And I do the Eagle Place Historical James Walk. So anytime I can learn more about neighborhood, I'm all for it.
Thanks for being here.
Hi, I'm Jocelyn. I'm with Belonging Brant, and I'm here because I wanted to be. And I had no idea really what Neighborhood Week was, but it started off amazing. So I'm just happy to keep on learning and talking.
Hi, I'm Jenna, and I'm also from Belonging Brant. And we came here because Risha has spoken a lot about you, specifically Joe, and also because we wanted to learn more about us. So yeah.
Awesome. And online, thank everyone for being a part of this today. We'll jump right in. Want to talk a little bit, just an overview of ABCD. ABCD is an approach, and it's a lens kind of which to see the world. There's a quote coming up. Oh, actually, we can stay right here. I've been working with ABCD kind of initiatives probably for about 20 years. Started with the group on the left there, which is a project called ABCD Cincinnati. And it was started because a number of families of kids with disabilities or adults with disabilities and adults with disabilities themselves participating in focus groups, saying they wanted more than just to be clients in a program. They wanted a sense of belonging in their community. They wanted activities that were meaningful to them. And one quote I remember a lot is, I want to have people to do things that aren't with me, that aren't paid to be with me. And I had heard John McKnight, the gentleman in the center of the picture with the goatee, speak. And he's the co-founder of ABCD, about ABCD. And it just made sense. I could see how it worked in my life and in my kids' life and in my family's life. But that wasn't how the agency I was working for operated. So it was supposed to be a 6-month pilot project that became an 8-year initiative of looking at how to build more connected communities, which led me to move out to East Vancouver to be a part of building caring communities. I was there for 2 years to incubate that program. And there's a group of connectors from Vancouver to Burnaby to Howe River that were working on this.
I'm working.
So I think the ABCD conversation right now is more relevant than ever because of a lot of things going on in the world, worker shortages, COVID, you name it, that so many problems going on. Now, what I really like about the conversations we're going to have today and a lot of real basic ABCD principles is I think it forces us to look from problems and deficits to possibility. Doesn't deny the problems and the deficits and the needs that are out there, but look for a way to change that conversation and to work on what's possible. And this is a quote from John from, I think it's from, I can't remember which book, but essentially it's the stronger communities, and John and his co-creator Jody spent time studying communities all over the world and looking at communities that were vibrant, places where people like to be, where something usually had changed. They weren't like that to begin with. Something changed to make them places people wanted to be. And usually it was people were engaged, people were sharing their gifts. And that's kind of somehow the principles of ABCD came to be. And I think we see that in a lot of work that goes on. When we shift the conversation, usually the outcomes and some of the possibilities change. And again, the dilemma, I should have a cup up here, in looking at, especially when I worked in disability services, which I did for 20-something years, we were very focused on the half-empty part of the glass, the needs and deficits. Part of that was driven by funding and Medicaid in the states, but they wanted to make sure the programs that we were working on addressed the needs and deficits. We didn't spend too much time in conversation about looking at the gifts, the things people cared about, the things they like to do, the things they know about. The same can be true of communities. Sometimes we think, when I was working in Cincinnati, there's YouTube videos out there. You don't want to drive through over the Rhine because it's seen as a very deficit community. We can see that as a community not full of gifts and assets. So this glass half full can be, we can look at groups of people, individuals, communities that way. We want to focus on the half full part of everybody and every citizen, which is kind of like the game. It wasn't looking at weaknesses and deficits, and we needed everyone to be included. I love ABCD. We'll talk about all the different community assets. I think it's fairly generic. It's understandable. Most people can relate to it and see how it works in their own lives. I think it's very adaptable. As I said, from the downtown east side of Vancouver to rural Powell River that you access by 2 ferries, whether the community has 1 million people in it or 10,000. I think the principles are very adaptable. And I think every community, every person has gifts and assets. We'll talk about these throughout the morning. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about people with gifts. And the gifts are things that people like to do, they pay attention to, they know about. We'll talk more about that. The second one are groups and associations on Eagle Place, neighborhood association, a great example of one of those. And we'll talk about some characteristics of those. And each of these assets, we'll spend some time talking about, because many of you are part of some of these, whether it be any of these assets, of why each one is so valuable. Businesses, institutions, and institutions, I mean kind of like businesses, agencies, nonprofits, land and the things that are on it, and culture and stories. This used to be an overhead from John McKnight. John's now 90 years old. When I started working with John, he would have his overhead projector with his little the flimsy overheads that you put on the projector. And these are from his original one. I like this one because people with gifts. It has a person holding a gift. And he tells a story about how a gift is meant to be given. If you buy a gift and you keep it, is it really a gift? Or is it just something you bought? So I like this, and we'll see some more of John's original overheads here in a little bit. Sometimes I talk about gifts of the hand, head, and heart. Gift of the head being things that you know about or you're interested in learning. Gifts of the hand being things that you can do, mix, make, fix, or create. When you start looking back at the bingo game, a lot of, you can see each of the categories kind of fall into some of these. Gift of the heart, the passions, things you care about, things that are meaningful to you, some of the concerns, whether it be community gardening. I know there's a whole lot going on with the food forest here. That's a great example. So the 3 H's sometimes we refer to these as. And probably if we had more time, we could sit down, we probably all have a multitude of each one of these. Give me some examples. This is Mr. Purdue. I got to know Mr. Purdue in the neighborhood in Northside. He likes to make musical instruments out of materials he finds in the neighborhood, whether it be skids, cellophane, anything, wooden pieces. And he taught kids how to make instruments that they can make primitive noises and music on. Here he's sharing I can't pronounce it very well, didgeridoo. And he's saying that he made, he's saying each of the kids' names through that. And you can see the kid there in the yellow shirt is pretty mesmerized. It sounds like it's coming from outer space. And again, you see here the gift of his hands, the things that he can do, and the impact of him sharing his gift. This is my friend Jerry. I've known Jerry since he was 4 years old. Jerry knows everything going on with the stars and outer space. And about right before the pandemic hit, I had lunch with him in Cincinnati, and he's had a new iPad. And he was showing me what was coming back from Mars that day. He's all up to date on the NASA space program. I didn't know they had the website that they have. That's purely amazing. And by the end of our lunch, photos were coming back from Jupiter. And he was speechless because it took 8 years for these photos to get from Jupiter to Earth. And he knows whole lots about what's going on with the NASA program, what's going on with the stars. In his community, he shared this gift by teaching a class on asteroids. And again, it's something he knows about. Jerry happens to know a whole lot about it. You don't have to be like the world's foremost authority on this for it to be your gift. And sometimes I don't like the term as much as it assumes that you're the best or some level of accomplishment. You can be like me with playing guitar and not be very good at all, which someone reminded me of here during the activity, and still be a gift if there's something we like to do. I met Jaime at a street festival in my neighborhood in Vancouver. Jaime's originally from Toronto, and he likes to create these labyrinths. And he had shown up at the Strathcona Street Festival and asked permission if he could put one down in chalk. And when I happened to come upon him, he was just finishing it. And I asked him what inspired him to do this. And he asked me if I had a moment. And I stayed around, and he wanted me to watch the difference between a kid and an adult doing it. And an adult came along with their kid, and the adult started, and he said, just watch, and they'll never complete it. They'll start and they walk over and they walk right over the chalk. They don't care. Her 5-year-old son completed the whole thing. Was very diligent about getting it. When he got it done, he had his arms up in the air and he was celebrating. And he said that's almost 90 to 100% of the time what happened. He said it's his little way of increasing child resiliency. He puts these things all over the place. He gets grants to do them. He makes them out of stone. He's made them out of concrete. And he does a lot of them all over the place with chalk. And he showed up unannounced and asked to do this at the street festival. And people all saw it, very colorful. And it's something that probably he cares about deeply, and showed me a notebook with all the places he's done them. He's met people from different countries who told him the word for a labyrinth in their language. And he keeps track of that, something he deeply cares about. So again, all these things that we care about can range all over the place. My friend Mandy. And sometimes we let appearances dictate whether we see the gifts or not. And so it might be easy to see. Does anyone see, what gifts do you see in this photo?
Child is reaching out to her without any preconceived idea.
So, thank you.
Yeah, how to use her communication word.
Close. One of her gifts in there, and it's probably hard to make out, is you ask her one of her favorite things to do is arts and crafts. And she is asking kids at the Wyoming Street Fair what kind of hand stamp they would like. And in this one, I think she has fruits and vegetables. She has different ones depending on the time of the year. Another question, and I'm sharing questions, and on your bingo sheet, what kinds of questions? Because ABCD is a lot about questions more so than answers. Having questions open a conversation around gifts. And for Mandy, I think one of the questions Jeff, the person who was working to build connection with her, asked is, what happens on your very best day? And on her best day, her brother brought her niece and nephew over, who were 5 and 8 at the time. So she loves what you pick up being around kids. So you'll start looking at off. One of her other things that she deeply cares about is Wyoming. It's a neighborhood outside of Cincinnati. She feels everybody should live there. She never wants to leave there. Everything she needs is there. So she can be at the Wyoming Farmers Market every Wednesday and get to know kids, share her gifts, and be able to do what she cares deeply about. We all have many gifts, and this is Antonio. Antonio has become a fairly well-known artist. Some people would call him, and he called himself initially, an outsider artist, and even co-founded an outsider artist studio in Cincinnati. But I share Antonio, when I first met Antonio, he was making art objects out of trash in his neighborhood. But when he would show me the art objects, a lot of them were these wooden things or out of pizza boxes, but he would also give them names, write a story about them. And so a lot of his gifts started blending in. Like all of our gifts, we probably all have gifts of the head, heart, hands that start to almost bleed into each other. And he creates jewelry around this and loves talking about this. And it's paying attention to gifts all around. Because I can very much be an introvert, and getting to ask good questions, I started like, I'm not sure I would have ever gotten to know Dennis. I met him at a community center in Cincinnati. I saw him there every week. And I thought he must live in the neighborhood. I had struck up a conversation. He told me he was always organizing something, whether it be a game of these they were called chicken dominoes or ping pong, or they had this other game they played. He was a great organizer. He was always there. And I thought, you must live in the neighborhood. What part of the? He said, no, I live over in Avondale, which is almost 4 miles away. Because I walk over here because I really like walking. I said, that's about an 8-mile round trip walk. He said, but I love the people here. It's just such a caring place. But a lot of the caring was because of his organization where he would tap in. He paid attention. He was a natural connector, and he was always trying to get something going that engaged people at the community center and made it a super hospitable place. So it's paying attention to the gifts we see everywhere we go.
The finicky word.
My friend Jim, we first started doing this pilot project and looking at changing the conversation. A case manager with Hamilton County asked me to go to meet with Jim because he was just moving to town and wasn't sure what kind of programs and services he needed. My only question was, could we have a different kind of conversation with Jim, and one that focused not on the programs and services, but on his gifts. And he was supposed to be in at noon that morning. He was moving from eastern Ohio to western Ohio and kept getting delayed, kind of like my plane did here last night. And he didn't end up getting in until like 7 o'clock, 7:30. And you could tell he was tired and exasperated. We went down to meet him, and he had a handful of thankful belongings he brought with him. I said, were you able to bring everything that was important to you? He said, I brought my buttons. That's all that matters. And he brought this Tupperware bin out full of these buttons, and he had a backpack similar to mine, crammed full of these buttons, and told me a story. He'd been collecting them for 35 years. And up to that point, I think he identified as me and the case manager as kind of government do-gooders that he had not related to. He was very mistrustful of us. Wasn't about learning about any programs and services until I asked him this question. And he happily got the Tupperware bin out. I asked him which one was his favorite. I think I may have it in the slide. I can't remember the next slide. Let's go back. And he pulled out this one. It's a Lyndon Johnson inauguration button from 1965. And he could pull out any one of them and tell you who gave it to him, where he was when he received it. And most of them, a lot of them were political buttons, but the conversation shifted. and you could see him relax. And again, he's probably the person in Cincinnati I talk to the most. Since I've moved to Canada, and he calls me weekly. But in that day, we joke about it because he didn't want to talk to me very much until we started talking about the buttons, and everything shifted and the relationship started to develop. And I learned over the course of time that not only was he a great collector, but he had a great memory. He could remember these stories, and he was a great storyteller. And he was so appreciative. And over the years, I've told this story a number of different places. A lot of times people will send me buttons to give to Jim. And now I don't know how he'll tell me he has like bins and bins and bins full, and they're all just as meaningful. This is me with one of my sons and one of the many soccer teams he played on. And one of the ones, probably one of the first ones I coached. And I coached it very reluctantly because that wasn't my gift. But the coach, and they was kind of a bad news bears soccer team. My son loved being on it, but they hadn't won a game in 2 or 3 seasons. And it really didn't matter because my son had a ball being on the team. Their coach Jack was great with the kids. They loved Jack, but then Jack decided to quit, coach a different team. And they couldn't find a coach for the team, and the organizer for the soccer club said, "Would you do this?" And I said, "Well, surely you can find somebody else." And he said, "Well, we've really asked a lot of people. No one wants to do it. We see you here all the time." "Okay, I'll do it." My daughter laughed because she said, "Dad, you don't even know the positions." But I actually won a tournament. We went down to Louisville, and they won a tournament. And I kind of lit up my passion for it. I learned a whole lot more about soccer. And I share this because I wasn't the world's best soccer coach. I wasn't even the world's most mediocre soccer coach. I was somewhere probably on that lower level. And I had parents remind me of that all the time. But it didn't matter because I was outdoors with kids playing a game that I started to love. And so I share this because it doesn't mean you're the best at anything. It might be something that you get to tap into some other gifts of yours that still makes it meaningful. Questions, especially working with people who maybe aren't used to identifying their gifts. And like the activity that you have here is kind of structured and put you in it. You started learning about people in the room and some of the things that probably you didn't know before you came into the room. You know, what do your friends like about you? The question I asked Mandy, what happens on your very best day? And you start learning, and what do you do on a Saturday afternoon when you don't have any work or errands to do? I gave you a check for $500 right now and told you you couldn't pay a bill. What would you do with it? And just some questions can help us learn about people's gifts. Can you think of other ways that you might be able to learn about people's gifts in your community?
Observing, I find, is another way. Especially if it's something you're not, especially if it's something you're not familiar with, is observing is a really good way to kind of get a handle on what's happening, or tapping into maybe who would be that gatekeeper that you're looking for, who's really passionate. Sometimes it's just kind of standing back and seeing the interactions.
Thank you. What other ways?
What your way to engage with people that you might not encounter in your daily routine?
And again, those probably the combination of those two are the two I found this to be primarily the most about, just watching and asking a question, because most people want to engage about things that are important to them. Go to the next one. We'll do a small group conversation, and we'll have 2 groups of 3, and we'll do probably 2 or 3 of these throughout the morning. But this whole thing of acknowledging, when Peter and John were writing Abundant Community and spent some time in Cincinnati, we would reflect on some of the experience we were have implementing some of these things. And we started reflecting back to people with the gifts that we saw. Mostly because we were amazed by all the gifts, and we were intentional about looking for them, what you see. And so question I have for you is, has there ever been a time when a gift of yours has been acknowledged by someone else, or that you've had the opportunity to acknowledge a gift of someone? And what happened when it happened? And probably it's happened more than once, but share, and we'll get in groups of 3, and be together for about 7 minutes and just share a story about that. Within your groups, your main goal is to make sure everyone has a chance to talk. And you can move about the room and do what you can close together further apart from the other so you can hear each other well. Does that make sense? What are some of the things that came up in your conversations, the impact when that's happened? Did it happen to you or when you got it to somebody else?
Well, we were just chatting that I didn't realize that community living does like a core gifts program. They can help me understand more about what my gifts are. Do I have more than one? Do I have like what's my statement? And I didn't, yeah, so I just learned that.
All right, Carrie, go.
One of the things that we talked about was kids, and in my case, grandkids, and a lot of times, I'm talking 14 years and under, you can see what their gifts are, you can see what their talents are. And in that stage in their lives, they're not feeling the confidence. And without getting in the way and becoming too intrusive, you try and let them know what their gifts are and how they can use them and where they can go and that type of thing.
Awesome.
I think it definitely makes a difference when you recognize somebody else's gift or somebody recognizes your gift, because it's so powerful to have that be said to you, or when you can see the difference of, I don't know if it's like character or like their disposition, like completely changes for the better when you are able to recognize or acknowledge like somebody else's gift or when they acknowledge yours. It's just a very powerful sentiment.
That's awesome. Thank you. The night when Jim pulled out his button collection, I told him this is the most amazing collection of anything I've ever seen. And I mean, he had everything from JFK to, and the stories were just amazing. And you can just see when that happens to you, it's kind of, you feel acknowledged, you feel seen. I had it happen to me. The second time I heard John McKnight speak, was a bunch of transition teachers for Cincinnati Public Schools. And I was the only one from Cincinnati Public. Matt did work at Cincinnati Public. A parent that I knew had invited me there. I was kind of on the outskirts because I really wasn't supposed to be there, but I was on the edge of my seat, taking in every word John was saying. And at lunchtime, and most of the crowd there wasn't so into him, and they weren't as engaged as you are here today. And at lunchtime, the parent I knew brought John over to me and said, "This is a guy I want you should have lunch with Joe." And John started asking me what I did. I said, "Oh, we just started this new thing." And I said, "I need to apologize. I heard you like 3 years ago, and I've been telling your stories, and you've been telling all this information to people in the agency I work with." He said, "Well, tell me a story about what you do." And at that point, we just started this project. I told him the story about Jim and how Jim and I were starting to develop a relationship based on a different framework for a conversation. And John said, "That's the most amazing story I've heard in 45 years. And if you'll talk more," he had a question about who saw their communities as hospitable places, and nobody's hand went up. Mine and someone else's hand went up. And then he rephrased the question like he'd asked it incorrectly. He said, "But I want to help you with what you're doing, but I want you to tell the entire room this story and why your hand did go up when I did ask the question correctly." But whether John really thought that was the best story he had heard in 45 years, or whether it was even a good story, because I felt acknowledged, it set the framework for now a 20-something year relationship. And again, it makes you feel seen, and it sets the groundwork to develop a relationship, which is why this whole focus on gifts and the assets is so important, I think, especially right now with everything going on. Was there anything else anyone wanted to add, or do we have anything from the group?
Nothing from the group right now.
Okay. Okay. Well, okay.
I was just also saying in our conversation, this is a new language for me to understand. I get emotional. Sorry, just to understand what gifts are.
And the power that the gifts bring to you.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Can I just say, I've had a chance to work alongside Sharon. I'm going to talk about you just for a sec. Not to make you cry, but just to say, yeah, like, Pat, like, I think you have a hand-head heart. And Sharon, like, she's been on fire. Sharon is working, like, just spearheading and providing so much leadership to a grassroots piece through Belonging Brant called, we just named it.
Yeah.
By Brant, art reconnecting community. And this woman's on fire, and you can just see her passion for art and also for people. I'm so sorry, Sharon. And so for people coming together to change communities through art has been amazing, and she does get lit up. Her emails are amazing when things are just trucking along, and I can just see, yeah, and then we get all excited. When you get excited, we get excited. So it overflows, like that cup half full, cup full, like it's full and overflowing right now, which is brings joy to all of us. So thanks. I think that's what happens when people share their gifts, like it spills over, right?
Yeah.
I think the ripple effects of that are just, you never know, but it was usually tremendous. Amount of ripple effects.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's jump down. In the language, I think I'm gonna go over the remaining assets, and we have some definitions of them. And I think what you said, Sharon, it does provide a language and kind of a framework to begin sharing. Well, as we'll talk about some of these words, don't get too hung up on the exact definition, but we will talk about why some of the definitions are important.
Oh, can I just say, there's one comment from, sorry, one comment here from Brittany, and I'm not getting this on properly. Oh, here we go. Brittany just said, it makes you like you are contributing, appreciated, and valued. It makes you feel like you're contributing, appreciated, and valued in the community. I think that value piece is really important.
Exactly.
Yeah, thanks, Brittany.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I'm now on screen sharing. Okay. I don't like see it. I'm just gonna check in with the group. Tara, can you see assets-based community development ABCD Institute slide? Thumbs up or thumbs down, folks, if you can see the slide. Thumbs up. Woo. Okay. Great. We're good.
So we'll jump into the rest of the assets. And you could write down, as I go through them, you could write down the ones that you know of each category. And if you had a sheet like that, it would be the start of what we call an asset map. It would be listing out the ones that you know of. We'll talk more about the purposes of an asset map and why you would even begin to do that here shortly. But I'll jump into the association. We've talked about individuals. That's all we've been doing so far this morning, individuals with gifts.
Yeah.
So this is John's overhead for associations. And I love this because it's groups of people that come together. Usually with a common interest. This is one of my favorite associations I got to know in Cincinnati. It was called Lots of Funky Knots Knitting Club. And when they first started doing it, it was two women that were learning how to knit together. And they were meeting at the Blue Ash Starbucks in their neighborhood. And then they decided they'd put up a flyer on the bulletin board because they thought it might be more fun to learn how to knit with others. They had no idea they were starting a club or an association. They were just two people learning how to knit together. Before long, there were 35, 45 people showing up, and they created a name. But one characteristic of an association is they come together around a common interest. But Brittany invited me out to see the knitting club. And some of the people there knit as well as I do, which is not at all. Those of you who knit the little round thing with the pegs on it, they gave me that to play.
Corking, lovely.
But some of the people there, that's what they did. There was an 85-year-old woman who came, she didn't knit anymore, but she brought 3 big black garbage bags full of knitting material that she was donating to the group,
Nice.
but she still wanted to be there.
Mm.
And as I listened to the conversation, people were talking about their kids who were away at university. Someone was talking about their hours had been cut at the grocery store. Others were talking about troubles with kids. A lot of them, it wasn't about the knitting, but they were all there because they liked this really nice group. Usually in an association, members contribute. Whether it's you're bringing in the knitting materials, or a guy I met in the neighborhood says, I started his own civic group. He didn't need to create a civic group. He just wanted to get a group of people together to look at what they could do to make the neighborhood better. And they called themselves Westwood Works, and I'll maybe talk more about them later. But in Westwood Works, and in any kind of association, people contribute. You have an opportunity, you can choose. I could choose when I go to watch the Funky Knot, whether I want to knit. They're going to do a big knit-a-thon to do hats, little hats for babies at Children's Hospital. They can choose, they decide what they want to work on, but they all can contribute. Almost all are non-paid. Lincoln Ware is a radio DJ in Cincinnati who needed to be out walking more. He found he had difficulty getting himself out there. So he broadcast on his radio show that on Saturdays he was going to be at French Park and they were going to go walking through French Park. Before long, hundreds of people are showing up to walk. None of them are paid. And maybe sometimes there might be a person or two that's paid, but a pretty consistent characteristic is pretty much most people there are non-paid. They're there because there's some reason they want to be there. And probably kind of like the knitting club, people are there for all kinds of reasons, whether it's health reasons, socialize, be out in the park, who knows? A lot of them are informal groups and they decide what they want to do. Sometimes they really don't even have names. I got to know this group. They're a lunch packing. I call them the lunch packing group. They don't have a name. I met a Franciscan brother Al, who created this association because he had a passion for conditions for temporary day laborers in the city. And he got volunteers to show up on a Monday and Tuesday and pack 1,800 lunches every day. And he got volunteers to deliver these to workers throughout this temporary day labor sites throughout the week. He coordinated with a couple of other churches to make peanut butter and bologna sandwiches, and a snack went in and a juice box went into each of these bags. But they decide how they're going to operate. And this group doesn't have to be so formal. You know they're going to be there on Monday and Tuesday. Sometimes they usually start at 9. Sometimes they're done at 10:30. Sometimes they go to noon. And again, some of them are not quite as formal as lots of Funky Knots or Westwood Works, where they even have set meetings. But they decide what's going to happen. This is one we found in Brantford, 2009, right before the pandemic hit. We did a near and dear event in the downtown neighborhood, which we're going to do in Eagle Place this week, where people went out in groups and started doing kind of an asset map of the city. And I happened to find this one. This was in Warmington, which I think now may be closed, which is unfortunate. But we met him out on the street because someone was someone asked to put sidewalk chalk in front of his business. It's a great food here or something like that. And I went on in just to talk to him and I saw this on the chalkboard where they have a harmonica guild. I asked him, they get 30, 35 people there on Wednesdays. You don't need to have ever played a harmonica before. They have harmonicas there if you need one. But again, we came back and we had 80 or 90 people show up that day at the library. And I shared this one and asked if anyone in the group had ever heard of it before. And no one in the group had ever heard of this harmonica deal. And I thought that's kind of the difference. And we had some movers and shakers, a lot of people who were pretty active in the downtown neighborhood there. and that no one knew about this, I think is kind of, until you're out really looking. There's usually way more associations than we know that are out there. And I had the same experience both in Vancouver and in Cincinnati. When I was doing this, I lived in Cincinnati for 30-something years. I thought I knew a whole lot. I was pretty active. But until I started really going out and searching, where are the associations? Who are they? I realized how many I didn't know. Why do you think associations would be such a valuable asset?
Do you want me to grab the mic?
Yes,
Sorry.
sorry.
Sleep it on the job.
Do you want me to just keep it over here and then walk around so that you don't have to? I think associations are really valuable because they bring people together through, like you said, like a common interest. And when it's like, it's almost like giving back. Even though you're doing something that you love, there are ways that you're giving back to your community because you're building the sense of belonging, you're building those friendships, those relationships, and you're doing something for yourself and for others. So like, I think that all contributes to why it's valuable.
Awesome, thank you. Anyone else? And they're usually people who care about something. They're showing up, whatever the group is. If they've decided this is important enough that they're going to come out on a Wednesday night or a Thursday morning or a Saturday afternoon when they could be doing something else. So it kind of shows an energy and a focus of where people who are part of associations are. And it's also people, the most associations I've been a part of or spent time with, the people come with a passion for whatever the group might be. They also have many other connections and gifts that they're able to share, usually eager to share. We'll go to institutions. We keep on going. I like that slide because it references a table of organization. And in an institution, people are typically paid. And some common ones are schools, libraries, parks. DePaul Brant is a good example of an institution. The city of Brantford will be in it. Most people are paid to be there. And there's a service or something going on that they want to do on a consistent basis. And there's usually a set way for that to happen. But the main characteristics is people are paid. And some of the ones doesn't mean they can't sometimes behave like an association. And I've been working a lot over the last 5 years with libraries and museums across the US. The foundation granted community catalyst grants to libraries where they could tackle a problem from water quality to sense of belonging for new Americans to you name it. The needs were very diverse. This was one in Baltimore, the Enoch Pratt Library, that started paying attention to the gifts and passions of people at the library branch. And the day I happened to be visiting, the brewer from Heavy Seas Brewing, which is a local brewery, were there because they started noticing a lot of people, mostly older, were coming in the evening and hanging out, and they had a passion for craft beer because they all went to the pub across the street after they hung out in the library. So they arranged to do a convening with the head brewer from Heavy Seas. And they started paying attention to that. You know, a lot of libraries, I'll share another story about a couple of different libraries, and Brantford's another good example where they hosted the Near and Dear 3 years ago. And they began looking at not just being a place where you can distribute, come and get materials, but being a place to be a convener. We'll talk more about that. Faith groups are another institution. And when I was here, I spent a winter here once, working with CL Brant and a lot of time in community. So I went to a bunch of different churches. This is one in Vancouver, called Grace Vancouver, that was very passionate about looking at how to build connections in the neighborhood. And they weren't so much concerned about getting people in the seats on Sunday as they were about people in the neighborhood getting to know each other. And they started hosting open conversations outdoors, in the church and other places. And one of the things neighbors decided to do first was a neighborhood barbecue. And this is something they've done now for 12 years, which again is a power of an institution. And agencies like Community Living Brant, they've been thinking about this, I know, for at least 7 years, if not longer, but the role that they play in Brantford and the surrounding area of helping to make the community a better place. Why are institutions such a valuable asset?
it gives structure to, whether it's structure to a city or to a neighborhood. There's, some things are transient, these things usually are fixed. There are places where you can go to and maybe build on your community, that type of thing.
Excellent. They're kind of stable. They've been around for a while. They're recognizable. CL Brant's a great example. And one of the other key reasons is they have resources. They have this room that we can meet in today. They've got a number of people, when you look at their TO, who are employed there, who all have gifts, assets, and connections, and starting to pay attention to that. Mostly they have resources, and a lot of times they're kind of, most libraries are cornerstones in communities, especially rural communities. So they're well known, they're respected, and they've got some resources.
Just on the chat, Julie is sharing that they can give knowledge and resources. So yeah, just confirming that, yeah. Great.
Next one is businesses. I won't spend too much time on this. Get the physical space. Businesses, we were doing something similar to near and dear in a little town called Findlay, Ohio. It was a little bit different. People had a list of like 20 characteristics they went out from someone who'd done an open mic night, the Wi-Fi code at the local coffee shop. So they have a small university in their town called University of Findlay, someone wearing University of Findlay gear. They were very diverse. Someone who's riding a bicycle, but they were out trying to discover and meet people in the community. I went out and walked into this business. It said In Vogue Records, and I walked in and I thought it was going to be a record store. And what I walked into was an office area. There were two desks, Scott and his assistant sitting at a desk, and all the records I could see were on the wall there. And it was very different from what I expected. And he was I think they were surprised. I walked and came in, and I said, "Can we help you?" And I said, "Well, I thought this was a music store." And they said, "Well, we produce music." I thought you sold music. And they said, "Well, we do, but we distribute it." And he asked me, "What brought you in today?" And I said, "I'm part of a group that's looking out, exploring all the assets of Findlay, Ohio. The businesses, the groups, the people. The thinking is the more that they're connected, the stronger Findlay, Ohio will be." He said, "You have time for a tour?" He took me on this little, well, I think the next question I asked is, "Tell me what you do." And he told me we produce records. I used to live in New York City, but I moved back. I grew up in Findlay. And you can do this out of Findlay, Ohio. It doesn't have to come out of New York. I asked him what his most well-known band was. And he's pulling it off the wall to show me. He said, "Most of these are heavy metal punk bands." And I said, "Well, I don't know too many of them." And he showed me that. And then I told him, he asked me what brought me in. I told him that. And he started giving me a tour. And he took me back into 3 different rooms. A room where they make t-shirts and stuff all for the local business. Most of them were funny. All the silk screening materials was spread out like a big spider with all these arms. And he said, I do these for most of the businesses in town. And then he took me to another room where they do recording kind of things. And then he took me to another room and wanted to show me all the different kinds of records that they make. And he said, "This is one we make, and it says on this, if you want to listen to this, you got to put a coin on it." He said, "The sound quality of this is not going to be very good." And that's it. But you can produce mass quantities of this for next to nothing. And then he showed me this. He said, "This is I hand spun this myself. The sound quality of this is excellent. We made 25 of these. This is number 24. This is somewhere where we know where we want to distribute this band. We want them to be able to listen to it, and it's going to be excellent." And he said, "I like what you told me you're about." He said, "It sounds like it's like this about our community and building what's really important and the rich quality and making our community even stronger than it is. And I want to be a part of that. And if you need space to do any of these, I've got these 3, 4 different rooms I wanted you to see that you could use." But again, that's a role business can play. But again, the invitation was offered to him. He invited me and he invited his group because he's just as passionate about nobody. And then I went back to that group, which was 3 blocks down the street. They were out for 45 minutes and shared my story. They all lived and worked in that community. Any of you ever been into the record? Oh, we've seen it, it's on the corner by the river. No one has been there. We need to know these businesses and what they're about, not just that they're there. We don't want to be Google or Yelp. But you want to know that Scott is there. He moved back home to New York City because he loves the town.
Sounds a bit like Brant 1, right, Jason? We have for people who are, I'm just gonna say, just for people in Brantford.
It's amazing. It's so true. There was a day that I stumbled upon Brant one. So I don't know if I was trespassing or not through Lori's.
You weren't resident, so.
It could have happened. But yeah, we have like an incredible, so people can't see Jason here, but Jason's here videoing for us, and they have an incredible studio in Brantford, and it's tucked away, and they're doing great work, but not enough people know. So I just I love that story and that whole intentionally walking, being present in community and discovering. You can't do that enough. So it's amazing. And thanks for being here.
And just being here and talking, getting to know Jason a little bit, being very deeply about the community, happy to be here and be a part of something like this. Next one is one I'm pretty passionate about lately. It's a physical space, from the park to the vacant lots to all the things that are on top of the land, and a lot of the nature kind of things we think of. But there are also things like how we could use physical space. And I used this slide. I'm not sure I was so intentional about when I took it. This is what's called a community intervention I did with some of my neighbors. There's a festival in June, usually the first Saturday in June, called 101 Day. It started in South America. It's spread all over the world. And the idea is to try to get as many community interventions as you can get going on in one day. They can be a half hour long, they can go all day. I got my neighbors to agree to do one with me called My Great Day in Vancouver. And we did it at Mount Pleasant Park, and people could stop, write, draw, paint how they spent their best day in Vancouver. One of the best things I saw, the best artwork, was a little boy that drew a picture of his best day was when he saw his first caterpillar. Then there were 3 women. There's a bikeway. You see one biker there. Bikers were going by. 3 women stopped on bike and wrote down all the bars that they were hitting on their bike and what they were going to drink at each of the bars. But again, it was a different use of physical space to do. We gave this to the neighborhood center at the end of it. It was kind of an asset map mural of the neighborhood. And I also like this picture, and unintentionally, you've got a community garden in the background, which again is another use of physical space. But there are also things like murals. And I met Susan in Superior, and I can't remember if it's Superior or Ashland, Wisconsin, the very tip of Wisconsin. And I was driving to do a session that morning. And I had just read the Wright brothers biography. And she's out there like at 7:30 in the morning painting this thing. And so I stopped, I had to ask her what she was up to. And she had painted this one 8 years prior. And she is there touching it up. And you can see on the left where it's faded. And it's kind of like she showed me how she does it. It's like paint by number. And I didn't get all her paints in the background. And I asked her what inspired her to do this. And she said, I was too dumb to know I didn't know anything about creating a mural. She said her and her partner were artists who put in a grant to do a mural. And this wasn't the first one that they created. They created the Shimongo thing. But that was many years ago. And at this point, when I'm meeting her, she's done 22 of them.
Wow.
And they're known for their mural walk. And she told me all the ones I needed to make sure I saw when I was in town. But again, what a use of physical space. And she talked about all the groups that came in and were part of creating murals and how it built on the history and the culture of their area. And again, it's a different use of paying attention to the physical assets. This is what I got to know one of my first visits here. It's called the New Forest in the City. Right up, I think Risha drove me by it this morning on our way in. I was part of a tree planting that some folks on a Saturday invited me to go to, where they were planting a bunch of trees. And I was amazed by this place because you can see some factories out in the background, but when you were out walking through this place, it kind of felt like you were in a forest. And I know I think I met the 2 ladies who were had a vision for the food forest in the city at one of the symposiums a few years ago. And I was just like lit up on my way here. I'd watched the Best Little Garden movie. And that's what their vision was, and to follow them on Facebook and to see what they're creating with the use of a physical space in Brantford's pretty amazing. Culture and stories. When I moved back to Cincinnati, I'd been away for a while, and I moved back. I moved to the west side of town. And when you move in the west side of the town, everybody's lived there for their entire life. When you meet anybody there, they want to know where you went to grade school, where you went to high school. And they all have like grade school reunions. And if you did grow up in that part of town, it's very hard to feel like you're included. So that whole high school, grade school culture is a big part of it. When I started visiting here, it was on a weekend, not too far from now, I think. You go to the next slide. And one of the things was a Norfolk County Fair. And everybody I was meeting with that day, I guess the fair was open, was talking about that. I learned that was a pretty big event around here. I got to go to that weekend. I was paying attention to the things that are significant in the culture and the event cycle of a neighborhood. The neighborhood I grew up in and lived in Cincinnati, you save milk jugs, the plastic milk jugs. You saved them all in December because you wanted to make sure you had enough and all your neighbors had enough to put luminaria in them. It was about a half-mile long street. You put a little tea candle in it, you put it in front of your property, and that street looked like an airport runway on Christmas Eve. And that's a flyer went out, make a runway for Santa. And everybody went out that night, you saw it, you saw the runway. But that was a big part of the culture. And if you didn't know that, moved on that street, you probably wouldn't know that. But again, whatever kind of special about a neighborhood, those are assets that you can build on. We didn't get handouts, I'll send this. This is kind of a summary and some examples of each of them. And if we had time today, if we were meeting throughout the afternoon, we'd go in groups and we'd start to write down all the ones you know about. And probably if you sat down, you know so many, but then if I got in groups, maybe with people from the same community or maybe different, you'd share ideas would start to come up. And any of these, when you do an asset map, it's kind of a snapshot of the community and what's going on. And sometimes when people do this, it becomes kind of are you producing a product? And some of the libraries I was working with, we did an asset map, we got all these down. And usually an institution is really good about identifying the institutional assets. A lot of times they're not good about the people or the associations because they don't know so many of those. And when you do this, you also want to pay attention to, as you start doing this, who don't we know about? Who are we missing? I'm working with a group out in Montana, in North Dakota and South Dakota, we're looking at developing connections for older adults who are out there who are living out in the community and looking at, they've been bringing people together and like, who are we missing? And someone said, we're missing the postal carriers. And some of these folks, that's the most consistent person they see is a postal carrier. And begin looking at who isn't included, because we want to make sure we're paying attention where we're strong and where we're not so strong. Because it also kind of tells a story about the community. And listening to just some of the stories that have been going on in the room since we've been here, what's going on in Brantford, gives you a snapshot of some of the energy and some of the community building that's going on. So I want to do one more small group, if we have time. We'll go for 6 minutes, maybe pair up with some different people. And we all have a story we tell. Some of you were telling me stories just since I've been here. But what's the story you find yourself telling the most about your community? And share that in your group. Make sense? Everyone get a chance to speak. What was that conversation like?
That's great.
Good.
We want to talk more.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Nice.
Do you want to talk? Oh, I was just here with the microphone.
What made the conversation good and that you wanted to go more?
It felt like we were just getting started,
Okay.
hearing about this community and that community and this association and that one. Yeah, there's just so much to talk about.
And I was
In
only
6
in for about the first 20 seconds of your conversation, hearing John's story about the mural
Yeah,
and it's pretty inspiring. And it
Yeah.
just gives you ideas and gives you energy.
yeah.
Some of the other things about the conversation.
We started talking about how we got involved in, like, whether it's community gardens, community association, and how
once you're involved, all these other opportunities open up to you that you never even knew were there. So it's kind of a growth process that just keeps on going.
Mm,
If you want to.
Awesome. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jim.
It's a gift that keeps on giving. It is, it really is.
Anyone else? Anything from online or online?
Nothing here right
We
now.
talked a little bit about, John was saying like if there was a shift from being a student to being a resident of Brantford. I'm pretty sure it was a positive shift nonetheless, but that was one of the things that kind of struck me in our conversation. And then I was saying like I'm not from Brantford, but since working in Brantford, I've learned so many things and I feel so connected to the community, even though I don't live here. I feel way more connected to Brantford and Brant County than I still do in Burlington. Like it's so interesting to see that shift, even though I haven't quite figured out what it is yet. It could be because I'm passionate about my work, or it could be because I'm more passionate about Brantford than I am Burlington, or it could just be because I don't know. Anyways, that's what I shared.
Awesome, thank you. I also like this activity because I think it tells the value of stories. And paying attention to the stories and the stories we tell, and if we're with an organization or an agency, how we collect those stories and share those stories. Because again, I was only in this group for about 20 seconds and I was pretty excited about what's going on in Eagle Place because of the story. When you start hearing those stories, like John said, maybe you feel like an invitation, or maybe you hear a story like that, I could do something. And it then becomes kind of a snowball that gets bigger and bigger, and before long you're showing up at all kinds of things.
A comment from the chat, Joe says, that conversation stumped us a little bit to start, but however, once we warmed up, we were so eager to share our experiences. It was neat that everyone had so many different experiences. Yeah. Great. All right. Am I sharing the screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about an additional kind of bonus asset that a lot of times we don't pay attention to. And it's some of you in this room. Those are people who are just natural connectors. You do this, maybe you don't know the language you're hearing today, but you're out there, it's just what you do. Sally, I got to know Sally at a community center in Cincinnati called My Neighbor's Place. And the three ladies there, people become members of it. There's nothing to join, but they get a card. There's door prizes. They come in. Sally's not an official volunteer. She's hanging out there and she's scouring the room. And she's about to turn and notice that I'm there. And she's going to come up to me and want to know what brought me there today, where I went to grade school, where I went to high school, where my kids are going to school, and why I'm there, because she knows that about everybody in the room. And these are people who are, what kind of skills? I mean, Sally's a natural connector. And that's all she pays attention to, is looking for ways to connect people. Do you know people like that? And what are some of the traits that they have?
Good listeners.
Good listeners.
Vulnerable, comfortable being vulnerable.
Comfortable being vulnerable. Sally won't have, it's okay.
Yeah.
She feels pretty confident that I'm going to engage with her. What else?
I think like John said, like you need someone who's a good listener, but you also like need that balance of someone who's willing to make the first step for a conversation too. So you need someone who's willing to be engaged and then also listen after too.
Awesome, thank you. These people also have a wealth of knowledge. They know the people in the room. She could tell me where certain people live, why they were there, a lot of different groups are going on. She knew the history of the place. And I was curious about it. She was too eager, and again, set the grounds for relationships to develop. And also for me, I learned a ton from people like this, how to make myself vulnerable and feel okay about it. People who are like this, like, that wasn't me. But watching other people who are very talented at doing it, and just how they do it, and seeing people always respond almost fairly well to that. So we can learn a lot from them. So if we would have started this today, we would have had an asset map. And if you begin thinking of the ones you know, one of the things that CL Brant has done is looking at ways to engage community and putting together an asset map from Belonging Brant to the near and dear activities. But if there's a way to get people engaged, if we could sit here and do it today, we could spend another hour. You could get, but if we got a lot more people who are just as passionate as some of you are about your neighborhoods, involved in that activity, probably that asset map's gonna be much richer and much more accurate about what the story of that neighborhood. I want to share a story. Some of you may have heard the story, which is why the animals, and again, sometimes we think it has to be something huge that we're going to try. One of the places I lived in Vancouver, I should have taken a bigger wide angle lens of the yards here. The houses are all broken up into 4 or 5 units. Most of them have on the far right, you see the edge of these shrubs. They go up about this high in almost everyone's front yard to give some privacy. And you can hear people on the other side of the yard, but a lot of times you can't see them. And some people go straight out from the units, out the back door to the carport, get in their car, drive into the laneway, go to work, come back, drive down the laneway, park the car, go in their back door. You might not ever see them. When I moved to this neighborhood, it was very difficult to get to know people. I decided to do a $9.99 experiment, and I bought 3 bags of little plastic animals, and I put them on the 3 stumps. We had a big tree, then we had our shrubs, but the trees were really not, the stumps were really not used for anything except maybe if you want to put your foot up and tie your shoe. But I put 2 animals out the first day, and every day for 2 or 3 weeks, I put an animal out. Early on, can we go back?
Oh, sure, it wasn't
Back.
working. There we go.
The stump on the far left, those neon ones started showing up. I didn't put those out there. I would leave for work. I could walk to work. Spider-Man. I didn't put Spider-Man there. Spider-Man was there for a few days and he disappeared. Neon guys, more neon guys just kept showing up. I knew something was going on with them during the day because some days all the lizards would be in the tree bark, going up the tree bark. Some days it'd all be in the dirt. Next slide. Some days it looked like they had an all-day staff meeting. Good, we're back.
All right.
Thank you everyone for your patience. We've had some wonky things happening with computers here today. But with Jasper, when I came home, I got to meet him and his mom, who told me stories about how they had gotten to know the twins who lived kitty corner from them across the laneway, who they had never met before. Now that it was the twins who insisted on taking the frogs for a stroller ride around the block before their nap.
Oh, that's.
And again, animals kept coming and going, and they really, I quit putting out animals, and the place took a life of its own. One day I was leaving for work, and my neighbor Dean said, "I saw your sign." I said, "What sign?" And he said, "Out at the zoo." And again, animals would come and go, and this hippo had showed up and it disappeared. The hippo was important to somebody, missing. Have you seen this hippo? Where's Hilda?
Oh,
Where's the, oh my gosh.
These are little plastic animals. That's the beauty of building this connection. It's all about relationship. And the more that we can build this social fabric, so when I haven't seen Jamie in a while, I wonder what Jamie's up to these days. I should connect with Jamie.
Yeah.
And again, this is a little $10 experiment. I just moved 3 months ago. Now I'm on Ontario. You say that.
Ontario.
I moved to Toronto about 3 months ago. And I live in a neighborhood that's very different from the neighborhood I lived in Vancouver. And I'm looking at how I get to know people. And I have a little front yard that's about as big as your table that was all overgrown with maybe bigger than that, but they yanked out a tree, all these roots were in it and dead grasses. So I thought, we could do something with that. So I thought, maybe I'll try the zoo thing. So I put 3 rocks out near the sidewalk, because it went up, the garden was up about this high, and see what happens. And I put 3 animals out the first day. Later on the day I went out, there was 1 left. The next day I put out 2 more. Right, the day I went to check, there was 1 left. I thought, well, maybe I'll put more animals out. So the next day I put 6 animals out with the 1 that was there. So there were 7. By lunchtime, I looked out and they were all gone. I thought, this is interesting. And I thought, well, I haven't really paid attention to the culture around here. Because I call it the free store. People put stuff out in front of their houses or apartments all over the place that they want to get rid of. You could furnish your apartment. There's sets of dishware, there's art, there's all kinds of stuff people put out. So I thought, okay, this isn't gonna work here. Because people are they're thinking I'm giving away animals, which I guess is okay. But then I'll give up on this. I'll think of something else. The other thing, I really haven't engaged with anybody in the community. So one day my neighbor Chris was going by and we started talking, and he works for a thing called Small Press. And he was telling me about that. He's in publishing. And I thought he also works for the University of Toronto, but does this, and that's his passion. I said, "There's small independent press." He said, "No, it's about kids and connecting kids around stories." And I said, "Oh, I should tell you about what I was trying to do out here." And I told him, and he said, "You probably need to put something up differently. People probably wouldn't take it then." I thought, okay. And he said, "Maybe like a little small fence or a sign or something." I thought, okay. And he has a son, has a disability, who was sitting with him, 4 or 5, I guess. And he was just kind of listening, not saying anything. I'd asked Chris what they were up to, and we're off to the toy store. So what toy store are you going to? He said, "The one that begins with Dollarama." I said, "Oh yeah, that toy store." So about an hour later, I hear a knock on my door,
Sorry.
and Chris is there with his son. And so again, now I'm thinking, okay, now we have to try something. And so this inspired me, and place goes out there. And it came with a little fence kind of thing. Put them out there with some signage, which was Chris' suggestion, because he thought it was be something that kids in the neighborhood would really like. And just put up some colorful pipe cleaners and what are the animals up to? Before long, now it's only like in its 4th day, other animals are showing up. People are bringing their favorite animals. 2 kids up the street bought their moose that they bought in PEI, their favorite that they want to be part of. And go to the next. People are hanging out and playing. And now I've got to move plants around because plants are going to get trampled, but that's an okay problem to have. Because now people are taking over and liking it. So again, I share this story because it's a very simple thing. And again, it's $9 experiment but any of this, whatever things we want to do, I made the mistake of just I didn't talk to anybody about it versus talk to Chris. Now people know and are engaging around. Sometimes we try to do things on our own without looking at who'd like to partner with us on some things. It goes much better. And all of this, Wendell Berry, I've just begun reading a little bit of Wendell Berry. This is from a book of his called Jaybird Crow, which is a fictional book, but it talks a lot of really cool stories about community development. I was always on the lookout for what would be revealed. Sometimes nothing would be, but sometimes I'd be held astonishing sights. And I think that's what this is all about. It's just having different eyes for the gifts and assets, looking for we can build connections and strengthen relationships. We'll stop there. I think I'm pretty close to time. I was going to go into the roles of institution to play, but we're right at noon. So I'll open up to see what questions people might have or anything you want to ask.
Do you do this kind of mapping strictly for these kinds of gatherings, or what is it?
Great question.
Anybody in a community could say, "I'd like to approach this man, but I don't have the money to do this," and like, how does that work?
Well, I'll show you a couple examples why we got them. This is one that happened in Burnaby. We did it with a group of people that wanted kids to begin. So who talked about, John talked about kids, identifying your, we got a spinning wheel that had just questions on it. Where's the place you love to go? Where do you have the most fun? Where have you learned something? The kids could spin them.
So go ahead. Belonging Brant does the same thing. It's awesome.
They could spin the wheel and they would map out where that place was. So it's looking for ways to engage. People could do this on their own. We love, that was available to any group that you want to borrow that wheel and take it. This is from Near and Dear 2019. We had a group of 35 kids from Central Elementary show up, along with Josh from City Council, and people just went out in teams. You see Jamie there talking to police officer at Fountain Square or Harmony Square, but it was a way for people to be out doing this. But again, it's whether you want to use it as a product or a tool or just something you want to pay attention to. My experience and a lot of people I've worked with is the more you kind of pay attention to it, the more your mind gets trained to see and engage. I think there might be one. And again, I think roles an institution can play. They can be a convener, an activator, a connector, a supporter. CL Brant's a great example. Belonging Brant, and something like that exists is a really good example of an institution being an activator today. And the symposiums they've done now for 4 years are a great example of being a convener, of bringing interested people together, because you want to identify who else cares about this. Who else cares about making a better Eagle place? Who else cares about, I'm working with a little town in northern Wisconsin right now that's, they're facing probably everywhere, I'm sure it's here too, a worker shortage. They can't find workers to support this. Who else would care about this? Well, probably older adults. Probably there's lots of other groups. Maybe again thinking, maybe let's all get in a conversation together and talk about, well, what's a flip part of that? How could we build a more caring community for everybody? Maybe that's more paid workers. Maybe it's different partnership, which is at the bottom there. And they're having some success with that so far, but it's flipping it and engaging with more people who might care. I think I might keep going. I'll give you another example. And this is, I know the Brantford Library is great about, and they do host a place to be, a neighborhood in Philadelphia. You had a little small grant, and they're in the very southwest corner, a very, what would be traditionally poor neighborhood, and felt like they were not getting their share of city resources and programs a lot of times. They got a small grant to provide stipends to neighborhood ambassadors. And they started hosting these info sessions at the library to learn more about this. And they would do the activity I talked about. We didn't get to do it today, where they would write down their gifts of the head, heart, and hands on these cards, and they'd interview each other about it. And it was a way, because that's what they wanted to identify in the community, because they wanted to find out what the community really cared about, because they felt the city government didn't know. And that a lot of ABCD is about using what we have to get what we can dream of. And sometimes we count on our institutions to do that solely for us. And I work with people with disabilities all the time, the families, and we do that. And then they have what I ran into in Cincinnati. They don't have a sense of belonging. They don't have people in their lives who aren't paid to be with them. And they feel isolated and lonely when they're not in a program. So it's looking at how do we tap into all those other assets that aren't institutional. So they wanted to do that. This is the asset map they came up with. This is so pretty like this because when they were doing these conversations with people, they found that Miriam, who was lit up by this conversation, because she showed up for one of these info sessions. She said, I don't want to be paid to do this. And I don't even want to do the conversations with people. I want to draw what you're finding. So she was able to fit in 88 of the 300 something assets they had discovered at this point. And they use it. They laminate it, they printed out a full page, both pages of their Globe newspaper for people to just reflect on. They take it into senior centers and the schools, a laminated version, begin, what else do you know about? And they found out that a lot of the priorities that people had in there were different than what the city saw. But it's, again, part of this is also shifting power and control to residents. So you don't have to depend on the city of Brantford to do everything for you. You've got John and a group of residents in Eagle Place that determine what's important to them and acting on. So it's also a way to begin shifting power. These are just some ways of convening, and they can be fun kind of ways. We were so amazed at all the different gifts we were discovering. We invited this group to come, the two ladies that started Funky Knots, come share an 8-minute story. Don't tell us your life story. What's your gift? How do you share it with others? So they told their story and they were sobbing. I mean, it was an emotional story, but it was so meaningful to them. This coach of the losingest high school football team in America came and talked about the impact that he wanted to have on the students and making them great, or his players of being great neighbors and great citizens. And in fun ways, we met a woman who had a passion for, she was dismayed by all the stuff she saw in people's trash. And she had heard of an event like this out in California. It's kind of a free flea market. She called it up for grabs, and here's where we connected. We connected my neighbor's place to her, to a couple other neighborhood groups. And they did this on a Saturday where you could bring 2 gently used items that you didn't want anymore. And you could take as much as you want from the room. And they had, I think the room might be there, next slide. They had tons of stuff.
Oh, wow.
It was all donated to my neighbor's place. We run a free store at the end of it. And they also asked people coming into the room, what's your gift? They had heart and hands there because it was a way to do an asset map. So it's not so much you're putting together the map itself, but you're looking for ways to begin to connect them, like to do something for ups and grabs, or Belonging Brant, or your art group is a great example of that. Great question. Other question? I won't go with this one. We'll do 5 more minutes if you gotta go. This is one we did Treasure of Cincinnati. The guy, the pirate there on the right came up to me afterwards and thanked me. Because we did put people in small groups. He heard these 5 stories and put people in small group. And what's your gift? What can you dream of for your community? And John had been president of the local civic group. And then he wasn't president anymore and he was a member. And when I saw John leaving, I said, how was this for you, John? I said, are you still with Westwood Civic? He said, I quit. He said, every time I went to the meetings, I didn't feel good about where I lived because it's so focused on all negative stuff. You go to their meetings, you feel like you need to move. He said, I was inspired today. I want to start a different kind of group that focuses on the gifts and the assets and what we can dream of for our community. My question to him was, do you know anyone else who feels the way you do? Those were the people who felt the way he did. He said, my whole cul-de-sac feels that way. Because we used to be really involved. The first thing they did was a float in the Labor Day parade for a scavenger hunt in the neighborhood called Treasure Quest. And they had a pirate theme to it. And a bunch of people showed up and they went out and they did asset mapping with all these kind of questions. There were prizes and they didn't have a name. And they started meeting in bars and gas stations and places in the community and talking about what was important to them. Before long, lots of people were showing up. This is one, they were going to meet outside at the local auto repair shop, and it rained, so they went inside. And I think this is a difference here. And from like an association, because sometimes you have associations that behave like institutions. Sometimes some institutions, maybe some faith communities, behave like associations. Associations kind of behave like this. They're in circles. You got look at the smile on the kid's face. I'm not sure too many neighborhoods, maybe a lot of neighborhoods. I know the one neighborhood association that John was part of before, kids didn't go because you were sitting in rows and it was very top down. And that was an example of an institution behaving like an association. But then I'm visiting John after a few months. I was like, John, you've really created an asset-based civic group. They're meeting in circles, identifying what's important, what the gifts are in the room. They started, you go to the next slide, doing all kinds of things. I asked him, what are you discovering? And he shared, this was after 4 months. This is the gifts that we've discovered. Craft beer lovers, public television pioneers, gardeners, people who care about fitness, people who are great with kids, historians, decorators, coaches, graphic designers, motivators, knitters, people who are spiritual, people who are electricians. I think Jerry's in there, people who have a love for the stars and are passionate about astronomy. So that's what they were intentional about paying attention to. They found out people wanted to do things. You'll see some of the things. This is very old, 2015. Some of the events that they were doing, a pop-up beer garden, which is one of the most popular things, movie nights, front yard fiestas. They do a second Saturday every month. They close down the Main Street now. Now it's huge. And it went from his 8 or so neighbors to now they have thousands of members.
Wow. Wow.
I owned a house. I moved out of that neighborhood. I owned a house. You couldn't sell a neighborhood. You couldn't sell your house in that neighborhood without losing your shirt. Crime was rampant and the businesses were all dying until John started this. Now the neighborhood's one of the most desirable neighborhood, up and coming neighborhoods in the city. Property values are back to where they should be, and they do all kinds of events. And they've kept their focus, and they've impacted the local civic group. They act more friendly now and more neighbor driven than they ever were before. which is, you got a quote by Margaret Mead, a group of, small group of people coming together about something they care about. They've totally changed the neighborhood. Now you go now, it's safe to be out on the streets at night. People are walking all over the place, and there's all kinds of businesses going on.
But these are folks online, so we probably should wrap up. It's 10 after 12, so it's awesome.
Thank you for all your questions. Thanks for the energy in the room. Thank you for being here. So, this together, pretty monumental effort to make this available to so many different people.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, and thanks everybody on, oh, I'm muted.
Thanks everyone online for being here, and yeah, Tara in the background, Jason, all the folks running around, and especially to Joe for an incredible, didn't I say he was an amazing storyteller off the hop? And I know he didn't disappoint. Amazing stories here today for neighborhood associations, for institutions. I even heard some solutions to everyone's staffing problem there. There was something for everybody here. So that was amazing. Thanks so much, everybody. There is a survey for those of you online when you log out. So I'd love for you to fill it out. It takes 2 minutes. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
That's a lot to pull off.